My boss stole my work for months. Then my secret trap exposed him. The hum of the projector was a low predatory growl in the background. In the sterile, glass-walled boardroom on the 47th floor, Elara Vance felt the blood drain from her face. Her hands, clasped in her lap, were cold and clammy. On the massive screen at the front of the room, her slides were being presented. Her data, her meticulously crafted 5-year growth projections. And standing there, basking in the glow of the screen, was her boss, Marcus Thorne, speaking her words as if they were his own. As you can see from these Q4 analytics, Marcus said, his voice smooth and confident, by reallocating our logistics budget and implementing the Chimera framework, we can anticipate a 19% increase in efficiency within 24 months. The Chimera framework. He'd even stolen the name she'd coined for it. She'd spent 3 months of sleepless nights and weekend work developing it. It was her baby, her masterpiece, the project that was supposed to get her noticed, to finally lift her out of the mid-level analyst role she'd been stuck in for 3 years. She had presented it to Marcus in a one-on-one meeting just last Tuesday, her heart pounding with pride. He had listened intently, nodding, calling her work groundbreaking. He said he would socialize the concept with senior leadership to get her the credit she deserved. Now he stood before the company's CEO, Mr. Sterling, and the entire executive board, taking a bow for a performance he hadn't even written. Elara's mind reeled. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was grand theft. Every bullet point, every graph, every single syllable he spoke was a piece of her soul being auctioned off to the highest bidder. Mr. Sterling, a man whose time was measured in thousands of dollars per minute, leaned forward, his glasses perched on his nose. This is impressive, Marcus, very impressive. This Chimera concept. It's exactly the kind of disruptive thinking we need. Thank you, sir. Marcus beamed, the picture of corporate grace. It came to me late one night. A moment of inspiration, you might say. Elara felt a hot surge of rage mixed with the icy dread in her stomach. She wanted to stand up and scream, "He's lying! That's my work!" But she was paralyzed. What could she do? Interrupt the CEO? Accuse her own director in front of the entire leadership team? It would be career ruin, her word against his, and Marcus was a master of perception, a charismatic chameleon who had everyone, especially the higher-ups, eating out of the palm of his hand. She could feel the eyes of her colleagues on her, but she dared not look up. Did they know? Did they suspect? Or did they just see their boss? Brilliant and bold as ever. The presentation continued for another 10 minutes, each minute a fresh twist of the knife. He answered questions with her prepared talking points. He accepted praise with a humble nod. He was flawless. Finally, the meeting concluded. Mr. Sterling stood up, shook Marcus's hand firmly, and said, "Excellent work, Marcus. Get me a formal proposal by end of day Friday. I want to fast-track this." As the executives filed out of the room, a wave of back-patting and congratulations washed over Marcus. He soaked it in, his smile never faltering. Elara remained seated, feeling nailed to her chair. When the room was nearly empty, Marcus walked over to her. He placed a heavy, condescending hand on her shoulder. "Good team effort," he said, his voice a low, conspiratorial murmur. "That's how we get things done. You provide the data, I provide the vision." He gave her shoulder a final squeeze, a gesture of ownership, not camaraderie. Then he turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the cavernous room with the ghost of her own ideas. She sat there for a long time, the projector now shining a blank white rectangle onto the screen. The initial shock began to subside, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He had underestimated her. He thought she was just a quiet worker bee he could take from without consequence. He thought she would sit down and take it. He was wrong. This would not happen again. He had started a war, and she was going to finish it, but not with a desperate outburst. She would do it with the one thing he clearly lacked: a brilliant, meticulous, and undeniable strategy. The next few weeks were a quiet, simmering hell. The Chimera project, now officially Marcus Thorne's Chimera Initiative, was the talk of the company. Marcus was celebrated in the company-wide newsletter. Elara had to sit in meetings and listen to teams discuss the implementation of her plan, all while Marcus assigned her menial data entry tasks related to it. It was a special kind of torture. He was flaunting his victory, rubbing her face in it every single day. He did it again 2 weeks later with a smaller idea. She had drafted a clever automated email sequence for the marketing department that would increase user engagement by an estimated 12%. She had sent him the draft in an email seeking his approval. The next day, the head of marketing sent out a company-wide memo thanking Marcus for his brilliant and time-saving new engagement strategy. Elara didn't flinch. She didn't complain. She just observed. She studied his methods. He never stole half-formed thoughts or rough drafts. He waited until her work was polished, complete, and undeniable. He was a vulture who only feasted on fully prepared meals. He took the finished product, filed off the serial numbers, and presented it as his own. He was arrogant, lazy, and utterly predictable. And that was his weakness. Her plan began to form, not in a fit of anger, but in a moment of cold, calculating clarity. She couldn't rely on her word. She needed proof, irrefutable, digital proof that was so embedded in her work that he would carry the evidence of his own crime into the boardroom with him. She spent a weekend researching metadata, digital watermarking, hidden code. She settled on a two-pronged approach. First, for every significant document or presentation she created, she would send a finalized copy from her work email to her personal Gmail account. This would create a third-party, time-stamped record of her work's existence, predating any presentation he could possibly give. It was a digital insurance policy. The second part was more creative. It was the trap. She needed a signature, a maker's mark that was uniquely hers but appeared completely innocuous and corporate. It couldn't be her initials or anything obvious. It had to be something he would see but not question, something personal. She thought back to her childhood, to the stray dog she had rescued and named Luna, L-U-N-A. It was perfect. She could turn it into a corporate-sounding acronym: Logistical Unification and Network Analysis, or Leading Universal Navigation Algorithm. It sounded plausible enough that Marcus wouldn't bother to ask what it meant. He would just assume it was technical jargon. She started to practice embedding it, a tiny light gray L-U-N-A, in the bottom right corner of her PowerPoint templates, a reference to the L-U-N-A protocol in the footnotes of her reports. It was subtle enough to be ignored by a casual observer, but clear as day if you knew what to look for. Now, she just needed the right project. The bait. It came a month later. The company was looking to overhaul its entire internal logistics and supply chain system, a massive multi-million-dollar undertaking. It was the biggest project of the year. For 6 weeks, Elara worked tirelessly, putting everything she had into it. She built a comprehensive 100-page proposal complete with financial models, risk assessments, and a detailed implementation timeline. She named it Project Vanguard, and in every slide, in every key document, she placed her mark. Data sourced via the LUNA framework. See Appendix B for the LUNA projections. It was woven into the very fabric of the project. The night before she was due to submit it to Marcus, she performed her ritual. She attached the final, complete version of Project Vanguard to an email. She typed her own personal email address in the To field. The subject line read, Project Vanguard, final version. She hit send. She watched the confirmation pop up on her screen. The first part of the trap was set. Now she just had to deliver the bait. The next morning, Elara walked into Marcus's office, her tablet in hand. She kept her expression neutral, professional, the same look she'd worn for months. Inside her heart was a jackhammer against her ribs. Marcus, I have the initial draft of Project Vanguard, ready for your review, she said, her voice steady. His eyes lit up with a familiar, greedy glint. Excellent, Elara. Walk me through it. For the next hour, she did just that. She laid out the entire strategy, explaining the cost-saving measures, the efficiency gains, the long-term vision. She watched him as she spoke. He wasn't listening to understand. He was listening to memorize. He took very few notes, a sign of his supreme confidence. He absorbed her words, her phrases, her passion, ready to repackage it as his own. When she got to a slide detailing the 5-year financial projections, he pointed at the screen. This is the core of it. This is what Sterling will want to see. He barely glanced at the small gray text at the bottom. Projections calculated using the LUNA model. He didn't ask. He didn't care. To him, it was just part of the background noise, the technical filler that made the important parts look more impressive. This is exceptional work, Elara, he said when she finished, his tone dripping with false sincerity. Truly, leave it with me. I need to digest this and figure out the best way to position it with the executive team. Your work deserves the right platform. She knew exactly what that meant. The right platform was him. Positioning it meant putting his name on the cover page. She simply nodded, transferred the files to his server, and walked back to her desk. The bait was in the water. Now all she could do was wait for the shark to bite. The following week was the longest of her life. Every time his name flashed on her screen for an instant message or an email, her stomach twisted into a knot. She feigned diligence on other tasks, but her mind was entirely focused on Vanguard. She overheard snippets of conversation. Marcus had been in and out of closed-door meetings with senior VPs. Whispers of a game-changing new initiative began to circulate through the department. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, the email landed in her inbox. It was a meeting invitation from Marcus's assistant. Subject: Executive Presentation, Project Vanguard attendees, Mr. Sterling, the Executive Board, the Strategy Department. Time: tomorrow, 9 a.m. Sharp. Her breath hitched. He hadn't even bothered to change the name. The arrogance was staggering. He was so sure of his power, so certain of her silence, that he didn't feel the need to cover his tracks in the slightest. He was walking directly into her trap without a hint of suspicion. That evening, Elara didn't go home. She stayed late at the office, long after everyone else had left. Under the dim, humming lights of the deserted floor, she prepared for battles. She opened her personal email on her computer and printed the email she had sent to herself containing the original Project Vanguard file. The timestamp was clear and bold at the top. She saved the original files, complete with their creation date metadata, onto a small encrypted flash drive, which she slipped into her pocket. She went over her plan again and again, rehearsing the words she would say, anticipating his reactions. She wasn't just fighting for credit for a project anymore. She was fighting for her career, for her self-respect, for every person who had ever been silenced or had their work stolen by someone more powerful. As she finally packed her bag and walked towards the elevators, the darkened office building felt like a silent coliseum, and she was ready for the games to begin. The boardroom was freezing. Or maybe it was just her. Elara sat at the long, polished mahogany table 2 seats down from the head, where Mr. Sterling sat with an expectant air. The VPs and other executives were filtering in, their conversation a low murmur of coffee-fueled morning chatter. Marcus stood at the front of the room, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, chatting easily with the chief financial officer. He looked confident, relaxed, like a king in his court. He caught Elara's eye for a fleeting second and gave her a tight, knowing smile. It was a smile that said, "Watch and learn how it's done. Remember your place." Elara simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod in return. Her own face was a carefully constructed mask of calm. Inside, adrenaline was coursing through her veins, sharp and electric. She placed her company tablet on the table in front of her, her evidence just a few taps away. "All right, everyone, let's get started," Mr. Sterling announced, and the room fell silent. "Marcus, the floor is yours." "Thank you, sir," Marcus began, his voice resonating through the room. "What I'm about to present to you is more than just a proposal. It's a new vanguard for our company's future." He launched into the presentation. It was a masterful performance, she had to admit. He delivered her words with a passion and conviction that was chillingly believable. He moved from slide to slide, explaining the complex logistics, the market analysis, the risk mitigation strategies, all without a single note. He was a perfect actor playing a role he was born for, the brilliant visionary. Elara watched the faces of the executives. They were captivated. They were nodding. They were buying every single word. A flicker of doubt entered her mind. Could she really do this? What if they didn't believe her? What if this backfired and destroyed her completely? She took a slow, deep breath and pushed the fear down. She had come too far to turn back now. Marcus reached the crescendo of his presentation, the slide with the 5-year financial projections, the one he himself had called the core of it. And here, he said, gesturing dramatically to the screen, is where the rubber meets the road. A projected cost saving of $40 million and a productivity increase of 28% over 5 years. This is the future of our operations. Mr. Sterling leaned in, studying the intricate graph. He was clearly impressed. This is airtight, Marcus. The numbers are solid. He then squinted slightly, his eyes drawn to the bottom corner of the slide. Just a small point of curiosity. What's that designation there? LUNA? What does that acronym stand for? The room remained silent. Elara's heart stopped. This was it. The moment of truth. Marcus was caught completely off guard. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. He hadn't anticipated a direct question about such a minor detail. He had seen the letters, of course, but he had dismissed them as unimportant jargon. He stalled for a second, a confident smile plastered on his face. But his eyes darted around, searching for an answer that wasn't there. Ah, yes, the LUNA model, he said, forcing a chuckle. That's simply a technical term. It stands for the leading universal network algorithm. It's the proprietary analytical tool I used to generate these figures. The lie was clumsy, it was weak, he knew it, and from the slight frown that appeared on Mr. Sterling's face, he knew it too. The air in the room shifted, the spell was broken. This was her opening, her one shot. Before anyone else could speak, Elara raised her hand slightly. Her voice, when it came, was not loud or angry, but it was perfectly clear and cut through the sudden tension in the room like a scalpel. Actually, Mr. Sterling, she said, looking directly at the CEO, I can clarify what LUNA stands for. Every single head in the boardroom swiveled to face her. Marcus froze, his hand still pointing at the screen. The blood drained from his face, and his confident smirk was replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated panic. The room was so quiet you could hear the faint whir of the building's ventilation system. Elara held his gaze, her expression unreadable. The game was over. It was time for the checkmate. Mr. Sterling looked at Elara, his expression a mixture of surprise and intrigue. Please, Ms. Vance, do enlighten us. Elara took a steadying breath, her voice remaining calm and factual. LUNA isn't a corporate acronym, sir. It was the name of my golden retriever. She passed away 2 years ago. I've started using her name as a personal digital signature that I embed in my original work. A wave of stunned silence rolled through the room. You could see the executives processing the information, the bizarre personal detail suddenly making the situation incredibly real. Marcus looked as though he'd been struck by lightning. This is absurd, he blurted out, his voice a full octave higher than usual. She's a disgruntled employee. This is a pathetic attempt to sabotage a major company initiative. Elara ignored him completely, keeping her focus on Mr. Sterling. I can prove it, she said simply. She picked up her tablet. Project Vanguard was a project I developed on my own over the past 6 weeks. This presentation, these slides, these numbers, they are all my work. With a few taps, she airdropped a file to the main boardroom monitor. A new screen popped up beside Marcus's presentation. It was a file properties window. This is the metadata for the original PowerPoint file, she explained, her voice acting as a calm narrator to the unfolding drama. As you can see, the author is listed as Elara Vance. The creation date is 6 weeks ago. And the last modified date is 8 days ago, the evening before I submitted the project to Marcus for his review. The evidence was stark, digital, undeniable. A low murmur went through the room. That proves nothing, Marcus sputtered, sweat beading on his forehead. She could have manipulated that. I anticipated you might say that. Elara said, her gaze unblinking. Which is why I also took the precaution of emailing the final, completed proposal to my personal email address before I gave it to you. She swiped on her tablet again. An image of an email filled the screen. It was from her work account to her personal Gmail. The subject was Project Vanguard, final version. The attachment was the very same presentation Marcus had just given, and at the top, clear and irrefutable, was the timestamp. 8:52 p.m., 1 week ago yesterday. As you can see, Elara concluded, this presentation was in my possession in its complete and final form a full day before Marcus even had a chance to review it. The room was utterly silent. The digital evidence on the screen was a confession in Marcus's own name. He had walked in with the stolen goods, never thinking to check the pockets for the owner's ID. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing he could say. He had been so thoroughly, so clinically exposed. There was no lie big enough to cover the truth. Mr. Sterling's face was like stone. He looked from the screen to Elara's calm, resolute expression, and finally to Marcus's pale, sweating face. The dots were connecting, not just for Project Vanguard, but likely for dozens of other brilliant ideas Marcus had presented over the years. The CEO's voice, when he finally spoke, was dangerously quiet. Marcus, my office, now. It wasn't a request. It was a verdict. He turned to the rest of the room. This meeting is over. The executives, looking stunned, began to gather their things, avoiding eye contact with Marcus, as if his failure were contagious. As Marcus shuffled towards the door, a completely defeated man, Mr. Sterling looked back at Elara. Ms. Vance, please wait here for me. The door clicked shut, leaving Elara alone in the silent boardroom. The massive screen still showed the proof, her presentation on one side, her time-stamped email on the other. She leaned back in her chair and finally, for the first time in months, let out a long, slow breath. The war was over, and she had won. Elara sat alone in the boardroom for what felt like an eternity, the silence punctuated only by the distant sounds of the city far below. She stared at the skyline, a tapestry of glass and steel, a world of ambition and deceit. She had faced the beast and had not been consumed. She felt an odd sense of calm, the quiet that comes after a violent storm. After 20 minutes, the door opened, and Mr. Sterling walked back in, closing it softly behind him. His expression was no longer angry but stern and contemplative. He sat down, not at the head of the table but in the chair next to her, a gesture of respect that did not go unnoticed. First, he began, his voice low and serious, on behalf of the company, I want to apologize. It is a failure of leadership when something like this is allowed to happen. We clearly failed to see what was going on, and for that, I am sorry. Elara simply nodded. Thank you, sir. Marcus Thorne's employment with this company has been terminated, effective immediately. He continued, his words clipped and final. We have a zero-tolerance policy for this kind of behavior. He paused, studying her. Tell me, Ms. Vance, how long has this been happening? She looked him directly in the eye and told him the truth, factually and without embellishment. She told him about the Chimera project, about the marketing email sequence, about the smaller ideas, the stolen phrases, the pattern of intellectual theft that had become her daily reality. She didn't complain or sound bitter. She just stated the facts. Mr. Sterling listened intently, his frown deepening with every word. When she was finished, he was silent for a long moment. You built an airtight case, he finally said, a note of admiration in his voice. You didn't get emotional. You gathered evidence, set a trap, and executed your plan flawlessly. You showed more strategy and courage in that 10-minute reveal than many executives show in a year. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. The position of Director of Strategic Initiatives is now vacant. It's a role that requires vision, integrity, and meticulous, forward-thinking planning. He turned back to face her. It requires someone who can not only generate brilliant ideas, but who has the strength of character to see them through and defend them, qualities you have demonstrated today in abundance. He came back to the table and extended his hand. The job is yours, Elara, if you want it. Elara looked at his outstretched hand, and then at the empty chair where Marcus had sat just an hour before. This was more than a promotion. It was justice. It was validation for every late night, every sacrificed weekend, every moment of doubt and frustration. It was the closing of a painful chapter and the explosive beginning of a new one. She stood up and shook his hand firmly. "I accept, Mr. Sterling. Thank you." A week later, Elara was walking into her new office. It had been Marcus's office. It was twice the size of her old cubicle, with a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a stunning panoramic view. The company had cleared out all of his personal effects, leaving her with a clean slate. She placed her laptop on the huge mahogany desk and sat down in the high-backed leather chair. It fit perfectly. On her screen was the first file she had opened as director. It was a clean new document, a fresh start. She was no longer just an analyst, a faceless source of data for someone else to claim. She was a leader. She had learned a hard lesson about the corporate world, that good ideas aren't enough. You need the courage to own them, to fight for them, and to ensure that your voice is heard. She had found her voice in the quiet fury of a boardroom, and she would never let it be silenced again. Her real vanguard was just beginning. Thank you for watching this story all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this tale of corporate justice and a victory well earned, please show your support by hitting that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Let us know what city you're watching from and how old you are. It's amazing to see how far our stories travel. Thanks again for being a part of our community. We'll see you in the next one.